people struggle with traumatic events in their own way.
Right.
And in the macho environment of the fire service, I learned very early on in my career that you just don't talk about,
Right.
how you're feeling.
Right.
That's not part of the job. Your job is to go and help people,
Right.
and you don't have time to experience those emotions, because as soon as you're done with this call, you're going to another one,
Right.
and you got to be present and ready to go.
Welcome to the Audacious Living Podcast, hosted by my man, Audley Stevenson, the Odd Man. He'll unpack wisdom and insights from a cross-section of top quality performers in business, media, sports, entertainment, and lifestyle to uncover key elements to help you live your best audacious life ever. So without further ado, here is the Odd Man.
Greetings and salutations, folks. It's Audley Stevenson. Hello, and thank you for joining me here on another edition of the most audacious podcast you'll find on the internet. That's right, this is the Audacious Living Podcast, and I appreciate you for being here as we continue our ongoing goal of helping our listeners live their best audacious lives ever. As always, I encourage you to connect with us through our social media channels. You can find us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook under the handle The Audacious Pod. And if you're watching on YouTube, then you know there's that bell down below. You tap that and you can subscribe to our channel. So it's that easy to stay connected to all good things audacious related. Now, David Hollenbach is a retired battalion fire chief who's made it his mission to take his lessons learned from the 23 years of service of battling fires to help others. In my opinion, firefighters and other frontline workers don't get enough credit for the work that they do, nor do I think it's recognized how much of a toll it takes on them personally from an emotional standpoint as well as psychologically. Things like post-traumatic stress disorder is very real for frontline workers who are the first on hand every time during moments of tremendous loss, pain, and grief. David does a wonderful job in providing some insights into that world and helping us understand that the job, the bravery that these people put forth, it's tremendous. And so I really appreciate David for being here, lending some insights, opening up our eyes a bit, helping us understand the world, the firefighters and other frontline workers. And so I think we've done a good job setting the stage here and getting you ready for what I believe is an absolutely outstanding conversation. So without any further ado, here's my chat with David Hollenbach. Enjoy. Hey, Dave, thank you for being here and joining me on the Audacious Living Podcast. It's such a pleasure to hang out with you today.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. I've been looking forward to this. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Listen, as I said before we went live here, I'm always appreciative of anyone sit down and chat like this. The work that people do, it is a passion for them, and so to be able to share their passions on this little humble platform, I'm so appreciative. So again, this is really, really awesome, and certainly want to get into your passion of self-improvement, specifically around individuals insulating themselves. I use insulating quite facetiously. As a former fire person, you would know how important insulation is, but from the standpoint of insulating themselves and fireproofing themselves, so to speak, for the challenges and adversity of life. We'll get you to talk about your book and the success principles and everything that you've kind of laid out. But maybe kind of as a starting point to get our listeners up to speed, if you can start talking about your background and the 20 plus years you spent in the fire service area.
Yeah, first I grew up in the fire department. My dad was in the fire department. He was a firefighter and later ended up becoming a state fire marshal, which he investigated arson fires. And when I got out of high school, I went in the Navy. After the Navy, I went to school to become a firefighter, and ended up um, going and working for the same fire department that my dad retired from.
Oh, wow.
And I mean, I got to work at some of the stations that I visited as a kid.
Wow.
And yeah, the firehouse that was right around the corner from the house I grew up in, kind of an old school firehouse with the brass poles that you'd slide down from the bunk room. And yeah, that was the first fire pole that I ever slid down was at that station when I was like 6 years old.
That's awesome.
But yeah, I went into the fire service. I had I had a great career, 23 years. There's ups and downs, and I always wanted to work at the busy firehouses where you get the most action. But when you're at those houses, you also experience, the bad stuff that that people do to one another, and
Really?
the pain that people experience, either traumatic pain or
Yes.
emotional pain when they lose somebody they love.
Right.
And I witnessed a lot of really bad stuff throughout my
Right.
career and struggled with PTSD. And that was one of the things that led to me writing the book, Fireproof. Hold it up for those that might be watching. There's people struggle with traumatic events in their own way.
Right.
And in the macho environment of the fire service, I learned very early on in my career that you just don't talk about,
Right.
how you're feeling.
Right.
That's not part of the job. Your job is to go and help people,
Right.
and you don't have time to experience those emotions because as soon as you're done with this call, you're going to another one.
Right.
And you got to be present and ready to go. So it's not the healthiest way to be, as I learned later on. And,
Right.
so I talk about my struggles with PTSD and some of the pitfalls of not addressing issues early on, some of the mistakes that I've made. And then when I left the fire service, that loss of identity and really digging deep to discover or rediscover, well, not even rediscover, because I don't think that I ever really knew who I was.
Okay.
Until I dug deep. And so those exercises, I was able to put together a method of really figuring out who you are.
Yes.
And it's not what you do for a living.
Yes. Yeah. Great
point. What you do for a living is or can be an expression of who you are.
I like that. I like that a lot. I like that. And you're absolutely right. And sometimes that gets confused. And so the loss of identity, it happens because you're like, I was doing this thing. I've always been doing it. It's taken away. Now what do I do? Who am I? Right. So it absolutely does come up a lot. I want to go back to one of the points you made. Certainly from the PTSD standpoint, that's something that, at least from my perspective, isn't something that is, when we're talking about firefighters and the job that they do, it's not something that comes up an awful lot, or I didn't even think of it actually as a real cause for concern, and it truly is, to be able to go from one call to the next, dealing with this traumatic situation, or watching these individuals go through this significant loss, and it kept on to the next one, and having to be present. Do you know if there's anything that's put in place now to support firefighters through this, or is mechanisms that exist that can help through these situations?
It really depends on the department that an individual works for, and the people that are in charge of that crew or
Right.
that battalion. It's the department that I came from and other departments that I worked with, there aren't really any automatic interventions, other than somebody is saying, well, that was a really bad call. Maybe we should go and see how the crew is doing.
Right.
And depending on who's making that decision, because they can go, well, I'm going to call because I don't know if I really want to drive all the way down there if they don't need to talk to anybody. And they make that phone call, and the culture being what it is, depending on who answers the phone, can be like, oh, no, we're good. And they're speaking for the entire crew. And though it might not be the entire crew, there may be one person
Right.
on that crew that is really having a rough time. And that's, that can be pretty tough.
I can see that. Yeah, no, I'm really glad that you raised that, because that's something that I've never, again, wasn't even a consideration point. Firefighters are brave, they're strong, they rush into battle, they save the day, and that's it. Right. No one thinks about the support that these individuals need, the helps they need, these frontline service workers need. And I know during COVID, a bit more attention was paid to frontline workers, and that became a bit more open in terms of a topic of discussion. But certainly, this is something that's been in place a long time before COVID came along. That's for sure.
Yeah. And I'll talk about. I mean, I can just maybe describe one call that people could possibly empathize with.
Okay.
That was pretty life-changing for me, as with a lot of other people that were on this particular call. This was not long after the Pulse massacre. I don't know if you remember that. It was the nightclub shooting in Orlando.
Okay.
Where a lot of individuals lost their lives, and
Right.
Their lives, families were changed forever. Not long after that, the University of Central Florida put together a program for firefighters and law enforcement officers.
Mm-hmm.
And really what they did was they adapted a program that was developed for combat veterans.
Okay.
That were struggling with PTSD. And they made that program available to firefighters and first responders because they were seeing like, hey, this isn't far off from the experiences of a combat veteran that, was involved in a firefight.
Right.
And so that program was available, and that was when I started experiencing some pretty horrific nightmares and just emotional outbursts, whether there was a couple of times where I just broke down in tears for seemingly no reason.
Right.
But what it was I was replaying this event in my head, and the actual call was one where at the time I was the chief of special operations for the department, and got a call for a car versus building, and it just so happened that it was a daycare center.
Wow.
And this car had been ran off the road. Somebody had swerved over. The car tried to avoid, but went into oncoming traffic, and instead of hitting the brakes, hit the accelerator even harder. And so they launched through the front wall of this daycare center. And on the other side of that wall was a room full of 3 and 4-year-olds that were sitting down for snack time. And beyond that table of children was another wall that, when the car went through that, found itself in a room full of 4 and 5-year-olds that were having playtime. And the car came to rest against the back wall of that daycare center. And it looked like a bomb had went off in there. And there was multiple children trapped under the vehicle. There was one little girl that perished. And there was just some really traumatic injuries. And the sounds of the children crying, and it was just, and seeing those traumatic injuries and on such small bodies was something that I had seen, but not so many all at once. And it was pretty rough to process that.
Sure.
And so that is what led me to get help, because some of my officers recognized this change in my personality. And encouraged me, even though I was denying any issues. I was like, no, I'm good. Because I felt like I was in a position where I needed to present that calm, that person that is put together, that that leadership, that command presence, that's and showing that I was human and had emotions, did not belong there. Which
didn't compute,
I was wrong about that. And I wish that, this is where I encourage other first responders and veterans to practice really good self-leadership. Because if you don't take care of yourself, it's much more difficult to lead others effectively. And you're setting a bad example for those people that should be taking care of themselves as well.
Yes. I think the topic of self-leadership is such an important one, because oftentimes, individuals will get into a leadership role and they think it's about the others and what they do and how they guide them and where they, how they direct them and what instructions they give and all that kind of stuff. And oftentimes don't think about themselves first, which it's yourself first and others afterwards, and which is a different way of thinking depending on your approach to it. And I understand that, but it is a topic that's extremely important, because if you can't lead yourself, then you really aren't effective to anyone else.
There's a saying that it goes like this: the leader of one can sometimes lead many, but if you can't lead one, you'll never lead any. And that being, lead yourself.
Right. No, makes sense. Totally makes sense. And thank you for sharing that story. It certainly was a powerful one, and it speaks to what potentially a firefighter could encounter on a daily basis. Right? You never know. Right? You respond, you slide down a pole, and off you go. And you have to rely on your past training that hopefully that will prepare you for the situation. But you're still going to see things out there that aren't you weren't prepared for fully, right? Like as much as your training can help you, you're still going to run into things. And so I wonder, in instances like that, how do you navigate that, or what's the approach if you're in a brand new situation you've never faced before?
Well, you do what I coach people on, especially those that are in the fire service or public service. There are so many eventualities
Okay.
that you can't experience all of them,
Right.
but you can train and get the basics and then get some advanced skills so that, when something that you haven't experienced before occurs, you can use some of your experience. You can use critical thinking. You can use tools that you have in your toolbox to address the emergency at hand. You might not have all of the answers, but the idea is that you have to be strong enough and sure enough of your abilities to be willing to make a decision.
Right.
Because life and death situations happen all the time. And there are people that will wait until they get more information, and then it may be too late. And that's where that Monday morning quarterback thing comes in, where it's easy to judge decisions made when they were made in split seconds with very limited information.
Yes.
When you're sitting back, 24, 48 hours later and judging those decisions with all of the information.
Yes. Yes.
So that is something that I encourage people in leadership positions to take into consideration when they're evaluating people's decisions. Like,
got you.
Were they making the best decision with, the best information that they had, in an attempt to make the situation better, or were they really just making bad decisions?
Right. Right. Yeah. No, I get it. And the decision-making piece is another whole aspect, because you've got to make split second life and death, potentially life and death, decisions in that moment with no perspective, limited information. There could be other environmental issues going on around you that come into play. And so it's, I can see where it certainly is hair raising. You focus zeroing really on leadership. How did you get there? What was the determining factor that made you decide that you wanted to focus your work around leadership after you left the fire service?
Well, the leadership journey began when I was in the fire service, and I found myself in a position of a lieutenant, a company officer. I was responsible for the personnel at this fire station. I had a fire engine and a rescue truck, which is like an ambulance, advanced life support unit that is staffed with 2 people, both of them firefighters, one of them maybe an EMT, but at least one of them would be a paramedic, capable of advanced life support.
Mm-hmm.
So I was responsible for these people, and I found myself going, man, why would they follow me anywhere? Like they were a mature crew. Many of them had more time on the job than me. My driver was close to retirement and had spent her entire career in special operations. So her technical knowledge was so far beyond mine at the time that it was like, man, how did I end up getting put in charge of these guys? And I'm like, I really felt ill prepared to lead them. And so I I started reading leadership books
Yeah.
and trying to figure out how somebody in my position could lead people that, have that kind of skill level and those established relationships already. They
Mhm.
were already a team. I was
Right.
coming in, and so I had to find my place and discover why they, a reason for why they would want to follow me. And the answer that I found was I had to be somebody that was willing to push themselves to learn the things that they needed to learn in order to be successful,
Right.
and then work really, really hard to help them develop. And
Right.
all the lessons that I learned at how to be a better leader, I passed them on to them so that they could be better equipped for when they got into that position.
Right, right. Yeah, and well, it's about how you can help others. We talked about, the self-leadership, but then the other part of that is what you do and the impact others and how you can help them. Is there anything different about the environment? Out of curiosity, I think I might know the answer when I ask anyways, but is there anything different about the environment in the fire service from a leadership perspective than say in an office or a working atmosphere or a business setting of some sort?
I would say leadership is leadership.
Mhm.
The principles apply across the board. There are some challenges when you are living with the people that you're leading for 24 to 48 hours. There's the personalities, sometimes you might not like that individual and you've got to deal with them for 24 hours. And the idea is that you don't have to like them, but
Right,
you do have to care about their success.
right,
And that to me was key. Once I realized that all my efforts really had to be at adding as much value to myself so that I could add value to them. Um, and it was for them, and ultimately for the citizens that we serve.
wow. Yep, yep, yep. Look, listen, I think that's a great point. Talk about you showed us the book, right? Fireproof. Talk a little about that book and just give us some insights as to what it's about and what. Well, first off, did you ever see yourself being an author, Dave? Like, where did?
Uh, you know, I started the first thing that I ever wrote. I wrote a poem,
Okay.
a love poem when I was in 10th grade, and I gave it to this girl that I had a crush on.
Yeah.
And I didn't know that she had a boyfriend who was also my friend, and I didn't know that they were together.
Right.
And so she showed it to him, and they made fun of me
Hmm.
ruthlessly.
Ouch.
And so I did not write anything for
Oh,
years and years and years.
that's tough.
And I really enjoyed writing. And so when I started to write more, I was like, one of these days I'm going to get something published. I didn't think that it would be a book on leadership or a book on philosophy. I thought it would be, some kind of poetry book or something.
Right, right, right.
And and after the death of my brother in 2010, I decided that I wanted to write a book about leadership because I felt that's what I was most passionate about. And I felt like I could add value to the fire service by sharing what I felt was good leadership
Right.
with that culture, uh, with that environment.
Gotcha.
But as time went on and my understanding and my experience, that I evolved and my ideas on leadership evolved.
Yes.
So I just kept on shelving what I was writing, like getting frustrated. Well, when I left the fire service, you know i I felt like I had lost my identity, and I really dug deep.
Mm.
and I learned a lot about myself, and I learned a lot about leadership, self-awareness, emotional intelligence. And I felt like I could share a lot
Okay.
and add value to people that may view themselves as somebody that nobody would like view as a leader.
Mm,
And you know, maybe we're not in a position that is quote unquote a leader, but there's
right.
always somebody looking at you. And if you're somebody that is eager to add value to others,
Yep.
there's somebody looking at you and like going, man, I would really like to be like them.
Right.
And
Right.
so you're a leader.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. You don't need to have a title to be a leader, right? And you can do that simply through your actions. And it's clear that your experience have led to that. Were there any surprises about leadership that you learned, or anything that maybe broke down a myth that you believed about leadership?
I feel like the better leaders
Mhm.
are more likely to share their mistakes
Hmm.
um, with the people they lead. The leaders that try and hold themselves on a pedestal and like, look at how great I am, I've achieved
Yep.
all these things,
Yep.
don't you want to be like me? uh, you know After the initial romantic period of going, man, they really are great, it would be
Yep.
awesome to be so awesome,
Yeah. Yeah.
then you're like, man, they're just like a cocky prick, I don't want to be like them. you know you want somebody that's real,
Yes.
that you can relate to, that is authentic, because you
Yes.
don't get to be this high achieving superstar by being perfect.
Yes.
You're going to fall on your face a lot.
Totally.
Those are the best lessons that we learn, the ones where we think it's going to go this way and you just crash and burn, and you're like, man.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, listen, I think we've all been there, right? We've all been there and had run into situations where things are moving along tickety boo, nice and well, and all of a sudden something comes along your path and you're detoured because you've got no choice. You have to respond to it. I think for the people that oftentimes struggle the most are the ones that don't want to take any action, that are really bogged down and caught up into this bad or negative thing that's happened, and they can't see nothing else in front of them because of that. I wonder if you sort of just talk about how overcoming those situations and what things people can do to get themselves back on track.
So one of the first things that I feel like we need to do as people is to identify our values. What is important to us? What drives us? Because we might be in a career that we just really don't like. We're just passing the time right now, making it through day after day. But what is really important to us? What is our value system?
Mm.
And digging deep and figuring that out is key.
Right.
Because you want to take action towards something that is going to lead you to happiness.
Right.
I mean, because that's really what we're all searching for, that sense of fulfillment.
Yes.
And what I feel can bring us the purest form of fulfillment is that feeling we get when we add value to somebody else and help them achieve something bigger than they thought they could achieve.
Right. Yeah, it's a daunting task, no doubt about, as a leader, in terms of being able to manage all that's going on and still stay true to the individuals. Out of curiosity, wondering if you have tips for new leaders. Like oftentimes, so oftentimes, and maybe maybe get your thoughts on this. You could be doing a task or doing a job, and all of a sudden you're tapped on the shoulder and said, you'd make a good leader or a good manager or whatever, supervisor, whatever you want to call that individual. But this leadership role is meant for you. They'll put them in this leadership role, which is an entirely different job. You get put in a job because you thought you'd be a good leader, but your job itself is different in your new position, right? That's difficult to navigate.
Yeah. And I would say that shore up your communication skills.
Okay.
And a lot of it is listening and understanding what the people around you are telling you. Because you've got to learn the strengths and weaknesses of your team. If you're put in a leadership position, that's probably the most important thing, is to learn the strengths and weaknesses of your team.
Right.
Assuming that you already know your strengths and weaknesses, right? Now, you use the strengths of your team to shore up your weaknesses.
Yes.
And, don't be afraid to ask for help. And there's an acronym that I use, and this comes from operating as an incident commander on a large fire scene or emergency scene.
Okay.
The acronym is CAN, C-A-N.
Okay.
And when I would be in the position of incident commander, I would get on the radio and ask, say, we're talking about a building fire or something, and I've got crews inside, and there's going to be a ranking individual inside with the other firefighters.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to be communicating with that individual, and I'm going to ask that person at different times during the incident, give me a CAN report, and they'll know what I'm talking about.
Okay.
I'm asking them to identify the current conditions, see the actions that are underway. What actions are the people inside taking at this moment to make those conditions better? And then what are their needs? What do they need? Do they need more personnel? Do they need more equipment? Do they need more hose lines? What is it that they need that they don't have right now to make their life easier? And you can apply it to yourself. And I would do this myself when I would get in the weeds, or like start finding myself focusing on certain details rather than the big picture. Because, in those really the high stress incidents where, all hell is breaking loose and there's a million things that have to be accomplished right then and there, and you're trying to coordinate all these personnel to accomplish these things that feed off of one another.
Mm-hmm.
You can start to focus on details that ultimately aren't the driving force of that call, and you have to take a step back. And I would actually take a physical step back away from the command board.
Yes.
And take some deep breaths. And, experts, this is like neurophysiology type of thing, where taking that, 60 seconds to take some deep breaths and get yourself recentered can, well, one, it'll oxygenate your brain, help you get back to the present and focus on the things that are important, but be able to see things from a higher vantage point.
Yeah.
So to remember that acronym, the CAN report, conditions, actions, needs. And you apply it to yourself, you can apply it to your team, but what are my current conditions? And it applies to your personal life as well. I mean, you can apply it to so many different things, but the current conditions, what actions are underway? What am I doing to make this better? And what do I need beyond what I already have? And that can do wonders
Right.
when you're feeling overwhelmed.
Right. Yeah, conditions, actions, needs, and again, when you think about those, yeah, you can apply them. They have universal applications, and it makes total sense, and it's a good process to sort of go through when you get to that moment, like where we're at, conditions, actions, needs. So that's a good one. Thank you for sharing that as well. You're a podcaster as well, Dave. Let's give a shout out to the world of those podcasters. We've got to stay banded together here. Embers to Excellence. Talk about what that's all about, and what do you do over there?
So it's interesting. I started working on my book. The story is interconnected. I was struggling with finishing the book, but I had all of this value, and I'm like, man, I feel like I could really share a lot, but I also like talking to cool people. And I know that I can learn so much from experts around the world. Let me see if I can do this.
Sure.
And I got the equipment, and the idea, it all started off with me interviewing public safety professionals and veterans.
Okay.
Talking about leadership lessons, but ultimately, what are those experiences where you failed miserably, and what did you do to overcome that situation?
Right.
What was it that kept you driving on? Because we've all been there when we mess up, and it's like, man, I'm really embarrassed. I just want to crawl up and hide.
I can relate.
So
I can relate.
what do you do? Like, because you have to put yourself back out there.
Yeah, you do.
And own those mistakes, and allow yourself to be embarrassed. Allow people to ridicule you. I mean, because if you own your mistakes, it's coming. Like, just own it and say, yes, I did do that. These are the lessons that I learned from this experience. First off, I'll never do that again.
Right.
And this is what I would have done differently had I had this knowledge before.
Right.
And you got to know that other people are going to make those same mistakes.
Yeah.
Even if you tell them, like, hey, don't do that. Sometimes people like me got to learn the hard way,
You're not alone, Dave. You're not alone. I can tell you, there's a few, including myself. Sometimes we take the more difficult, challenging one because not even, I don't know if there's a reason, we just do it just because, right? But I do like the philosophy around, when bad stuff happens or when we make mistakes. I'll be more specific on when we make mistakes, because we are going to make mistakes. No one is imperfect. And it's what you do when that mistake arrives, and how do you respond to it? How do you deal with it? Obviously you can't change what's already happened. So the next step is essentially on us, or on you, so to speak, right? Is that a fair way of putting it?
Yeah. I actually give an example in the book of an archer, right?
Okay.
You can spend your entire life training to compete in some archery contest, right? And you're going to hit the bullseye most of the time. When you fire that arrow, you're taking into account the wind, the distance, the elevation, all of those things. If you miss the bullseye, there's nothing you can do except put another arrow on the bow.
Yeah.
Correct your aim and fire again. You have to take into account this situation, because sometimes we're going to make decisions based on past experiences that don't necessarily apply to that current situation. Yes. And it's not going to turn out the way you thought that it would.
Right.
You can't sit there you can't sit there and dwell on it,
No,
or
you
that
can't.
second arrow isn't going to get sent down range, you know?
Right. No, it is. I oftentimes use the analogy of a valley, right? And that represents the hills and valleys. That represents sort of the peaks and the highs and lows and the good and bad. And so when we get down in those valleys where the bad stuff's happening, we need to know that we need to get to the other side and get up over that hill, because that's where the good stuff lies. And Dave, I truly believe that in every situation, call it bad, whatever bad situation that comes up, the other side of that is where the true greatness is. And our job is to find a way to get over, under, around, through that obstacle in our path to get there.
Absolutely.
So
couldn't agree more.
awesome.
And here's another lesson. This came from a conversation that I had, and I had been struggling with this myself.
Okay.
Because when I first started my podcast, the idea was that I would get people to share their mistakes and how they overcame them, or challenges that they faced as leaders and how they overcame those challenges. We're going to make mistakes, and the lessons I found that the lessons that I've learned when I've made mistakes were so valuable.
Yeah.
And I had to go through that experience to get that value. There's things that you can avoid by somebody going, hey, this is the best way to do this. If you do this way, you won't do this and fall on your face.
Sure. Yeah.
Well, sometimes you're like, yeah, but I think if I did it like this, I could still do it, and you're going to learn that lesson for yourself. What you don't need is that jerk off to go, I told you.
Yeah.
I told you that if you,
last thing you need.
and this is a lesson for us to go, because we're going to share that value. But when somebody makes the mistake that you told them they could avoid by doing it this way, don't go, I told you so. Say, hey, listen, I've been there. Let me give you a hand up. Let me help you dust off. You're going to be okay. And you're going to be better for this. If you allow this experience to refine you. Don't allow it to define you. Allow it to refine you.
Yes. Very important. And there's a key distinction between those two. And I'm glad you brought them up, because we absolutely need that and know that difference and know when we can exhibit one in our lives. So it's very awesome. Dave, this has been a very, very cool chat. And I mean, I've just appreciated the insights, and, we spend so much time on this podcast talking about the importance of us being audacious and being bold and going on taking the risks that we're meant to, because when we do that and we take that step forward, everyone knows, like, that first step in any major venture you're about to launch into, that first step is always the most terrifying one and the one that people don't want to take. But when you take that first step, when you take that first leap, all sorts of greatness is at our disposal. We just have to go and get it.
Yeah.
So,
if you don't mind, I've got this quote that I put in my book.
Okay.
Like 3 different places. This is a quote that I've used for myself throughout my career, just to stay centered and know, that I'm on the right path. Even when I'm making mistakes, at least I'm pushing forward.
Yes.
So this is The Man in the Arena by Theodore Roosevelt.
Okay.
It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done them better.
Okay.
The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming, but who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat.
Wow, that's powerful. Powerful. Thank you for sharing that. I think it's a really nice way to close out here. Dave, for our listeners who are checking us out and appreciating the conversation, I want to learn more about you. Where can we send them?
To my website. That's the best place, hollenbachleadership.com. HOLLENB as in boy, ACH, leadership.com. Everything is there. Links to my podcast. Actually, the entire library of my podcast is on there. There's resources on there for people that are struggling with PTSD.
Yeah.
There is all the links to my social media. People can go on there and follow me. And there's a bookstore where you can buy my book. If you order it from my website, I'll sign it and send it to you personally.
Gotcha. Very, very, very cool. Dave, this has been awesome. Thank you for this. Congrats on all the work that you've done, and particularly commend you on your work in the area of PTSD and helping people to overcome that. Silent killer for many, right? That holds people back from the things that they're meant to do or supposed to do, or the audacious thing that that's in front of them. So congratulations on the work there. Keep up the great stuff, and thanks for the time today. This has been awesome.
Yeah, man. Thank you for having me. And we got to set something up to have you on my show.
Sure. Say the word. I'm there. You got me. I'm there.
All right. Cool.
Take care, Dave.
Thanks.
Back we are here on the podcast. It was very, very cool to have David join me here on the Audacious Living podcast and share his insights into the world of firefighters. I think we often forget that, firefighters and other frontline workers are people too. They've got fears, hopes, and doubts. And so, they aren't immune to the tragedies that they witness on a daily basis. It's so very important for us to remember. So again, David, thank you so much for being here. And to our listeners, I'd encourage you to check out his podcast, From Embers to Excellent. I actually make an appearance on it at some point in the not too distant future, so definitely encourage you to check that out. As well, you can pick up a copy of his book, Fireproof, Your Grand Strategy for Transforming Failure into Fuel for Your Future. Big title, but says a lot, and it's a great, great read. I've got my copy for sure. You can check out his book as well as a podcast. Getting more information on his website, hollenbachleadership.com is where you can get more information. When I think back to my conversation with David, he really left us with a lot of great points. But if there's just one thing that I would take from my chat, it would be this. Trauma is a response to something, usually an event that overwhelms a person's ability to cope. We all experience and respond to it in different ways, and unresolved trauma can cause feelings of distress, fear, helplessness, and loss of control. The good news is that there are very effective ways to cope with and treat these stressful effects of trauma. For example, leaning on your loved ones for support if you feel like you might want to talk to them about the experiences or the feelings that you're having. Certainly facing your feelings is a great approach. While it's completely normal to want to avoid thinking about a traumatic event and doing things like isolating yourself from others, avoidance, or even substance abuse, those are all temporary escapes and not the healthiest way to cope. So ultimately, we have to face our feelings and the impacts they may have on us. Prioritizing self-care is another great one. And when we prioritize self-care, we take care of ourselves by eating properly, getting good rest, and incorporating physical activity into our daily regimen. And last but not least, be patient. Remember, it's normal to have a strong reaction to a distressing event. Take things one day at a time, and you will recover, and you will be able to go forth and lead that audacious life. Hey, listen, if you haven't registered for email notifications of the podcast, please know that you can do so simply by heading over to bestaudaciouslife.com. All you've got to do is enter your email address into the search engine, and you'll be immediately connected. And it's just that easy. To our listeners, thank you for being here, and thank you for the ongoing support. We reached the end of the episode, so I got to send out my shout out and appreciation to all those lovers of Audaciousness. It's so awesome to have you along for this ride. I would encourage if you are checking out this platform on your favorite podcasting listening channel, I'd encourage you to leave a rating, drop a comment. That helps the podcast grow. And so, and as long as it grows, we'll continue to keep doing our thing as long as you continue to do yours. Until next time, stay safe, be kind, show love to one another, and be audacious.
You've been listening to the Audacious Living Podcast, hosted by Audley Stevenson. If you enjoyed what you heard, be sure to like, subscribe, and share. Until next time, be audacious.